I stood frozen amidst the glittering ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Boston, as betrayal etched itself clearly onto the faces of those who shared my very own blood. My name is Colleen, a 27-year-old architect who has spent years designing the future while living in the shadows of a family that refused to acknowledge my existence. My older sister stepped toward me with a triumphant smirk dancing on her lips before she reached out and pinned a cheap plastic name tag labeled Waitstaff directly onto my silk lapel. The elite guests and powerful partners of Boston shifted their collective gaze toward me with heavy expressions of disdain, while my father and mother stood just a few steps behind her, casually sipping expensive champagne without uttering a single word of protest. My sister let out a cold laugh as she threw me a gaze full of unearned authority and commanded me to stay in my place among the low-level service staff where she believed I truly belonged. I did not flinch or look away, but instead stared directly into her eyes to silently signal that this demeaning position would likely belong to her in the very near future. At that exact moment, the most powerful guest in the room, Mr. Sterling, broke away from the crowd to approach me and performed a deep, respectful bow that left my entire family gasping in absolute shock. "Deanna, get to work and stay in your place. Are you entirely certain that this is where I am supposed to be standing? Deanna, Mr. Sterling, Miss Colleen, I have finally found the brilliant mind behind this magnificent architectural masterpiece. If you have ever been treated like a total stranger or looked down upon by your own family, please hit the subscribe button and share your story in the comments so we can support each other." Returning to reality, I was forced to look back at the cramped rented apartment in the suburbs of Boston, where every tragedy named favoritism began its slow burn. This modest space served as the silent witness to countless nights of unpaid labor, while the rest of my family enjoyed the luxuries afforded by my quiet dedication. My daily routine at the prestigious architectural firm usually involved spending most of my productive hours fixing the amateurish mistakes found within the blueprints submitted by Deanna. Despite being the one who actually stabilized the structural integrity of her projects, I never once received a formal thank you or any recognition for my essential contributions. Dad frequently utilized the high-ranking director title held by Deanna as a weapon to remind me that I needed to live a life worthy of the Bennett family name, instead of remaining a mediocre architect. He would often sit at the mahogany dining table and lecture me about how my lack of ambition was a stain on our prestigious heritage during our rare family gatherings. Mom joined in this chorus by constantly reminding me to remain silent about my extensive support for Deanna, because she firmly believed a perfect family only required one shining star to maintain its public image. She often whispered that my role was to be the foundation that kept the family's reputation upright, without ever seeking the spotlight for myself. The recent grand event celebrating the promotion of Deanna to the position of vice president was actually the direct result of her secretly copying my entire core manuscript from my personal laptop. I had spent months developing a revolutionary structural concept that she discovered and claimed as her own work during a high-stakes board meeting. Witnessing her receive a standing ovation for my intellectual property made me realize that I had been far too lenient by allowing Deanna and Roland to profit from my hard work for so many years without any form of resistance. The realization that my own siblings viewed my talent as a communal resource to be plundered finally broke the last remaining bond of loyalty I felt toward them. My brother Roland often mocked my modest lifestyle while he benefited from the social connections I helped maintain through my professional network. The betrayal within the Bennett household was not a sudden explosion, but rather a systematic erosion of my identity in favor of promoting a deceptive version of success. I finally decided to channel my frustration into creating a once-in-a-lifetime architectural project that would serve as a final promotion gift while secretly being the key to my total liberation from these family chains. This grand plan required me to maintain a facade of compliance while I carefully prepared the evidence that would eventually expose the fraudulent nature of the career Deanna had built on my back. I knew that the only way to truly escape the suffocating expectations of Dad and Mom was to let the entire world see the truth of who actually held the creative power in our family. Instead of arguing over past grievances, I focused my energy on the complex calculations of the Tower of Light project, which I intended to be my ultimate masterpiece and my final goodbye. Every line I drew on my screen represented a step away from the narrow-minded judgments of a family that only valued me for what they could take from me. I was no longer interested in seeking the approval of parents who chose to be blind to my worth as long as the family's bank account remained full. This architectural project was not just a structure of steel and glass, but a declaration of independence that would eventually force them to face the reality of their own greed. 8 months before the promotion party at the Ritz-Carlton took place, I began laying the first bricks for my plan to leave the Bennett family forever. This decision required a level of discipline that I had never exercised before, because I knew that every dollar saved was a step toward my future independence. I made the difficult choice to cut out all social gatherings and began skipping lunch daily just to accumulate enough funds for high-end 3D printing materials. These sacrifices were necessary because renting a professional laser scanner for my architectural models cost more than my monthly rent in the suburbs. My best friend Sloane was the only person who knew about this secret mission, and she supported me immensely by checking the structural feasibility of my tower designs. We spent many late nights in my cramped kitchen discussing the tension cables and glass weight, while the rest of the world was fast asleep. My brother Roland frequently disrupted my focus by asking to borrow my credit card to pay for his lavish dates at expensive downtown restaurants. He would stand in my doorway with a condescending smirk and casually announce that I did not need to use my money since I supposedly had no significant future in the industry. It was infuriating to watch him spend my hard-earned savings on temporary pleasures while I was struggling to afford the high-quality resin needed for my architectural masterpieces. Every time he mocked my modest lifestyle, I simply tightened my grip on my vision and reminded myself that his arrogance would eventually be his downfall. I refused to argue with him because any emotional outburst would only alert the family to the fact that I was working on something substantial. Whenever I saw Deanna boasting about her shallow projects on social media, I felt a fresh surge of motivation to complete my million-dollar gift. She often posted filtered photos of her office while taking credit for the structural solutions that I had quietly provided from my small desk at home. Watching her receive hollow praise from our colleagues made me even more determined to ensure that my Tower of Light would be an undeniable proof of my true talent. I spent many months working until 3 in the morning to ensure that every security code on the blueprints was sophisticatedly hidden within the complex geometric patterns. These codes were designed to prevent anyone from accessing the core data without my digital signature, which was a precaution I learned after years of her intellectual theft. Sloane often sat across from me while I adjusted the delicate scales of the model and reminded me that my talent deserved to be seen by the entire world. She saw the exhaustion in my eyes, but she also recognized the burning fire of a woman who was finally ready to stand up for her own worth. We meticulously planned how the reveal would happen because we knew that the Bennett family would try to seize control of anything successful I created. My parents remained completely oblivious to my efforts as they were too busy planning Deanna's career advancement and celebrating her fraudulent achievements. Mom would occasionally call to ask if I could help Deanna with a minor technical issue, which was always a disguised request for me to do her entire job for her. I maintained a facade of being the obedient and struggling daughter, while I was actually building an empire of my own in the dark. The physical toll of working 2 jobs and surviving on minimal sleep began to show, but the thought of my eventual freedom kept me moving forward. Every line I drew on the architectural software felt like a silent strike against the years of neglect and professional suppression I had endured. I knew that when the right moment arrived, the truth would be so blinding that no one in the Bennett family could ever deny it again. Sloane, Colleen, how much longer are you going to let them trample on your talent before you finally show everyone who the real architect is? Roland, let me borrow $2,000 for the weekend since a low-level architect like you clearly has nothing important to spend this kind of money on anyway. 10 days before the event, the atmosphere inside my family's mansion became incredibly tense when Mom summoned an emergency meeting to finalize the celebration details. Instead of handing me a formal invitation like every other guest attending the gala, Mom pushed a long list of kitchen and ballroom tasks across the table toward me. She explained that the family needed someone they could trust to oversee the expensive catering staff and manage the intricate floral arrangements at the Ritz-Carlton. Deanna demanded that I arrive at the hotel several hours early to inspect the menu and arrange the tablecloths because she claimed I had much better hand-eye coordination than the outside service workers. She spoke to me as if I were a subordinate employee rather than her younger sister, while Dad sat silently in his leather chair nodding his head in total agreement with her ridiculous demands. Dad firmly stated that my appearance in a support role would help the family save a significant amount of money on labor costs, while preventing the elite guests from noticing my professional shortcomings. He believed that keeping me busy in the background was a practical way to manage the public image of the Bennett family during such a high-profile evening. I sat there in silence and accepted every unreasonable request without a single word of protest, because I knew this was the perfect cover for my secret plan. My apparent compliance made them feel powerful and in control, while I was secretly making arrangements to transport my massive architectural model into the hotel's cold storage facility. I had spent months anticipating this exact moment of degradation, and I used their arrogance to hide my true intentions from their prying eyes. Roland burst into the room and began laughing loudly when he saw me studying the black uniform requirements that Deanna had laid out for the service staff. He deliberately tipped his mug and let the dark coffee spill all over my detailed task list just to test my patience and see if I would finally snap under the pressure. I watched the liquid ruin the paper, but I simply stood up and printed another copy without showing even a hint of the anger that was boiling beneath the surface. Roland continued to mock my lack of social standing and suggested that I should be grateful for the opportunity to even be in the same building as the influential Mr. Sterling. Their collective belief in my inferiority was so strong that none of them bothered to question why I was being so cooperative during such a humiliating week. Deanna spent the afternoon trying on several designer gowns and making sure that I understood the strict rules about where I was allowed to stand during the main ceremony. She insisted that I stay in the shadows near the kitchen entrance to ensure that the wine service was flawless and that no guest ever had an empty glass. My presence was required for the labor, but was strictly forbidden for the prestige, because the family wanted the world to focus solely on the fabricated genius of Deanna. Mom spent hours agonizing over the guest list and repeatedly told me that this was the most important day of my sister's career and that any mistake on my part would be unforgivable. I listened to her lectures and nodded my head while mentally checking off the security protocols I had integrated into my Tower of Light project. As the day of the party approached, I felt a strange sense of calm because the roles were already being cast for the final performance of the Bennett family's deception. I was prepared to wear the black uniform of a servant because I knew that by the end of the night, I would be the only one standing with my professional integrity intact. Every insult and every menial task they forced upon me only served to strengthen my resolve to walk away from their toxic influence forever. Mom Colleen, please help Deanna just this once, because this is the most important day of your sister's life, and we simply cannot afford any mistakes. Deanna. Do not even think about wearing that silk dress to my party, because it is far too elegant and completely inappropriate for your position as a server. At 6 o'clock on the evening of the grand event, the crystal chandeliers at the Ritz-Carlton cast a brilliant light upon the fake smiles of Deanna and my other family members. I was pushed into the food preparation area and forced to personally carry heavy trays of expensive champagne to colleagues who once considered me a serious professional rival. These individuals whispered behind their hands as they watched me navigate the crowded ballroom in a standard server's uniform instead of my usual business attire. On the main stage, Deanna was confidently presenting the Tower of Light blueprints, using the sophisticated technical vocabulary that I had painstakingly drafted for her months ago. She paced back and forth with a microphone in her hand, while claiming my innovative structural solutions as her own brilliant discoveries. Dad stood proudly beside the group of global investors and loudly declared that the talent shown by Deanna was the most precious legacy the Bennett family had ever produced. He beamed with unearned pride while accepting congratulations for a masterpiece that he knew his favorite daughter was completely incapable of designing on her own. Mom moved through the crowd like a social queen and repeatedly made sure that every influential guest noticed how hard Deanna had worked on this revolutionary project. I stood in a dark corner of the ballroom and watched as my name was completely erased from every technical document and replaced by the flamboyant signature of my sister. Seeing my years of education and sleepless nights reduced to a mere accessory for her vanity made the champagne tray in my hands feel heavier than ever before. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly when Mr. Sterling stepped forward and began asking complex technical questions regarding the hidden security codes within the digital blueprints. He pointed toward a specific geometric pattern on the large display screen and asked Deanna to explain how the load-bearing calculations would respond to a security breach. Deanna froze in place for a few seconds because she did not realize that I had integrated those specific patterns as a protective measure against her intellectual theft. She attempted to laugh off the question with a shallow joke about architectural aesthetics, but the serious expression on the face of Mr. Sterling remained unchanged. I watched from the shadows as her confidence began to crumble under the weight of a technical reality that she could not possibly understand without my help. Roland tried to intervene by offering Mr. Sterling a drink, but the powerful investor ignored him and continued to press Deanna for a legitimate explanation of the structural data. The silence in the ballroom became deafening as the guests realized that the celebrated genius of the Bennett family was struggling to explain the very project that had earned her a promotion. Dad and Mom looked on with growing concern as they realized that their carefully constructed facade was being threatened by a single persistent inquiry from a true expert. I felt a cold sense of satisfaction knowing that the security protocols I had hidden in the dark were finally doing exactly what they were designed to do in the light of day. Despite the tension in the room, I continued my service duties while keeping a close eye on the unfolding disaster on the stage. Every confused look from Deanna and every stammered response she gave was a victory for the truth that had been suppressed for far too long. I knew that the moment of full exposure was approaching, and that no amount of family prestige could save her from her own lack of professional integrity. Dad, thank you everyone for coming here to celebrate Deanna, because my daughter is truly a rare architectural genius in the city of Boston. Are you entirely certain that you understand all the structural parameters on those blueprints, Deanna? At exactly 9 o'clock in the evening, when the promotion party reached its absolute climax, the sheer arrogance of Deanna accidentally opened the door to her own professional destruction. Fearing that Mr. Sterling might soon discover the massive inconsistencies in her presentation, she looked for a convenient distraction to shift the attention of the room away from the blueprints. As I passed by with a heavy tray of refreshments, Deanna deliberately stepped into my path and lunged forward with enough force to send the crystal glasses crashing onto a prominent investor. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the silent ballroom as expensive champagne soaked into the tailored suit of a man who held the keys to the city's next big development. She immediately seized this chaotic moment to scream at me in front of the entire audience and labeled me a clumsy embarrassment to the prestigious Bennett family name. Deanna pointed a trembling finger toward the exit and demanded that the security team remove me from the premises instantly to preserve what remained of her dignity. My sister's voice was filled with a mixture of desperate fear and fake authority, while Mom and Dad looked on with expressions of deep shame directed entirely at me. I stood my ground without saying a word of apology because I knew that the script for this evening was about to take a turn that none of them had anticipated. Before the security guards could reach my arm, Mr. Sterling stepped forward with a commanding presence and firmly ordered everyone to stay exactly where they were. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a physical copy of the original architectural blueprints, which contained my invisible digital watermark and my signature hidden within the structural layers. The entire ballroom fell into a deafening silence as he held the documents up and declared that the entire promotion celebration was built upon the most serious professional deception he had ever witnessed in his career. He explained that I had secretly sent him these verified files a week ago to ensure that the creative integrity of the Tower of Light project was protected from theft. Mom and Dad stood frozen in their tracks as they watched the prestigious reputation of their favorite daughter crumble into dust right before their very eyes. The realization that the child they had always championed was nothing more than a common intellectual thief began to sink in as the guests began to whisper amongst themselves. Deanna's face turned a ghostly shade of white while she realized that her lies had finally caught up with her in the most public and humiliating way possible. The investors who had previously been praising her talent now backed away, as if her very presence was toxic to their professional standing. Roland tried to mutter something about a family misunderstanding, but Mr. Sterling silenced him with a cold stare that left no room for further excuses or manipulations. The power dynamic in the room shifted entirely as the spotlight moved from the fraudulent star on the stage to the woman standing quietly in the servant's uniform. I felt the weight of years of suppression lifting off my shoulders as the truth finally took its rightful place in the center of the ballroom. This was not just a victory for my career, but a final judgment on a family that valued deceptive appearances over genuine merit and honesty. Deanna, get out of here right now because you have completely ruined my entire party with your pathetic stupidity and your clumsy mistakes. Mr. Sterling. Stop this at once, since the person who needs to leave this room is not Colleen, but rather you, the person who signed your name to a masterpiece that does not belong to you. 30 minutes after the chaos in the main hall subsided, I stood before the grand entrance of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel to execute the final step in my long-awaited plan. I reclaimed the suitcase containing the original physical model and immediately activated a remote command to wipe every single byte of data from the private server of Deanna. This digital purge ensured that she would have absolutely no evidence or technical backups to present when her firm inevitably demanded an explanation for her fraudulent behavior. Deanna chased me all the way out to the parking lot with a face distorted by pure rage, while screaming at the top of her lungs that I had destroyed her entire career and her future. She looked desperate and broken under the flickering streetlights as she realized that her years of professional theft had finally hit a dead end. Dad stepped forward and attempted to use his patriarchal authority to demand that I return to the ballroom to apologize to Mr. Sterling for the public misunderstanding. He suggested that I should take the blame by claiming that I was the one who forced Deanna to sign her name on my architectural masterpieces. It was truly pathetic to watch him try to salvage the family reputation by sacrificing my integrity one last time for the sake of his favorite child. I looked him directly in the eyes and firmly declared that from this very moment I was no longer a member of the Bennett family, and they would never again benefit from my professional assistance. My voice remained calm and steady, because I had already mourned the loss of our relationship months before this final confrontation took place. Roland tried to block the path of my car by standing in the middle of the driveway while hurling insults at me for being an ungrateful and cold-hearted sister. He seemed to think that his presence alone would be enough to intimidate me into submission, as it had so many times during our childhood in Boston. I coldly pressed the accelerator and forced him to jump out of the way as I left behind the people who only knew how to live through borrowed glory and deception. The sight of them shrinking in my rearview mirror felt like a heavy weight being lifted from my chest after a lifetime of suppression and silent labor. I drove away from the luxury hotel with a sense of clarity that I had never experienced before, because I was finally the sole owner of my own destiny. Mom stood on the sidewalk with a look of utter disbelief as she watched her perfect family image shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces right in front of the city's elite. She tried to call my phone multiple times, but I simply turned off the device and focused on the open road ahead of me. The architectural world would soon know the truth about the Tower of Light, and I would no longer have to hide my genius in the shadows of my siblings' incompetence. Every mile I put between myself and that hotel was a mile toward a life where my worth was measured by my talent rather than my family name. I knew that the legal battles and the fallout from the party would last for months, but I was fully prepared to face those challenges with my head held high. The Bennett name was now a symbol of scandal, while my own identity was beginning to shine with the light of genuine achievement and honesty. I was no longer the quiet foundation that held up their lies, but a soaring structure built on the solid ground of my own hard work. Deanna, you are a monster, Colleen, because you have clearly been waiting for this exact moment just to stab me in the back after everything I have done for you. Dad, turn this car around immediately, because if you walk away today, you will never receive a single penny of inheritance from the Bennett family ever again. 3 months after the shocking scandal at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, my life has turned a completely bright and free new page. Deanna was fired immediately from her firm and had her professional license permanently revoked by the Massachusetts Board of Architects for severe ethical violations. The Bennett family was forced to sell their mansion in a desperate rush to cover the mounting legal fees and pay off the $1 million contract penalties owed to the corporation of Mr. Sterling. I have changed all of my contact information and moved to a different city to begin operating my own independent architectural firm with the generous support of Sterling. The pathetic calls from Mom begging for my forgiveness and the threatening messages from Roland have all been placed on my blacklist without a single hint of pity from my side. I finally realize that the true value of a person does not lie in their position within a prestigious family, but rather in their own hands and intellect. My new office is small, but every blueprint on the desk bears my own name and represents a future that I built without anyone else's interference. The freedom of waking up every morning without the heavy burden of family expectations is a luxury that I never thought I would actually possess. I spent years thinking that my silence was a form of loyalty when it was actually just a cage that allowed the toxicity of my siblings to grow stronger. Now that the dust has finally settled, I can see that the collapse of the Bennett Empire was a necessary consequence of their own greed and dishonesty. The lesson from this story is that you should never yield to those who take advantage of your sacrifices, even if they happen to be your closest relatives. Silence only makes the toxicity grow larger, and eventually, it will consume everything you have worked so hard to achieve in your professional life. I am no longer the shadow that supports the fraudulent success of others, because I have finally stepped into the light of my own reality. Every successful project I complete now serves as a reminder that genuine talent cannot be stolen or suppressed forever by those who lack integrity. My journey toward independence was long and painful, but the peace I feel today is worth every struggle I endured during those dark months. Thank you all for listening to the story of Colleen until the very last moment because your support is a huge source of motivation for me. Please share your perspective below. Was Colleen too cold-hearted when she pushed her family to the brink of total ruin, or did they simply get exactly what they deserved? I look forward to reading your thoughts and engaging in a meaningful discussion about the boundaries of family loyalty and professional ethics. Your engagement helps me continue to bring these narratives of justice and personal triumph to the screen for everyone to enjoy. Until next time, remember to protect your dreams and never let anyone claim credit for the brilliance that belongs solely to you.
Trước khi kết thúc câu chuyện hôm nay, chúng ta đừng vội bỏ qua những thông điệp sâu sắc mà hành trình của Colleen đã để lại. Câu chuyện này không chỉ là về sự trả thù, mà là bài học về giá trị và lòng tự trọng và ranh giới của sự hy sinh. Trong cuộc sống, đôi khi chúng ta lầm tưởng rằng sự im lặng và nhượng bộ sẽ đổi lấy bình yên trong gia đình. Nhưng thực tế, nó chỉ đang nuôi dưỡng sự ích kỷ của những kẻ lợi dụng. Đừng bao giờ cho phép bất kỳ ai, dù là người thân, đánh cắp đi bản sắc và thành quả lao động chính đáng của mình. Bài học đắt giá nhất ở đây là bạn không thể nhận được sự tôn trọng nếu chính bạn không biết tôn trọng giá trị của bản thân trước tiên. Sự đoàn diệt của Colleen không phải là nhẫn tâm, mà là hành động tự cứu lấy tương lai của mình khỏi một môi trường độc hại. Chân thành cảm ơn các bạn đã lắng nghe câu chuyện của Colleen đến giây phút cuối cùng. Đừng quên nhấn thích và chia sẻ nếu bạn thấy câu chuyện này ý nghĩa.